one has to be willing to risk it all, I think, artistically. Yeah, this is not the time to be afraid. It's the time to be bold. I hear a lot of times people will say, "Oh, you're so brave to tell that story," but I'm not brave. I was just trying to save my life.
I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast. Today, my guest is Regi Carpenter, an amazing storyteller from the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. We're going to begin with a story told by her entitled The Woman of the Sea. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin.
I am a woman upon the land. I am a Selkie on the sea. And when I'm far free every strand, my dwelling is in Scollskerry. I am a woman upon the land. It had been a hot day. I am a Selkie on the sea. And the man had spent most of it in the hayfields working. And when I'm far free every strand. So he had come to the water to cool himself. And what better place for it? My dwelling is in Scollskerry. For there was a breeze fresh off the sea. As he climbed to the top of the hill, he could feel the spray on his chest. He could smell the sea in the air. There was a full midsummer moon, and he saw the sand sparkling in the moonlight like fish scales in the sun. He went down to the water. He looked over here, and then over there. He saw the waves crashing against the rocks. And then he looked over by a large white rock, and he saw a circle of women. They were dancing. They were naked, and their bodies were as pale as the moonlight itself. He saw all about them, brown patches on the sand. They looked like they had been flung with careless abandon. And then the man realized that these were the women of the sea. They come up, selkies, once a year. They shed their seal skins to become women, and then they dance and leap and laugh on the earth for joy. This was a rare sight indeed, and the man was enthralled. He began to creep closer to the women, and as he crept closer, his shadow preceded him. It fell into the circle of women. One of them danced upon it, and the spell was broken. They looked about, and when they saw the man, they began to cry. They quickly picked up their sealskins and ran down to the water, and soon the air was filled with their cries and sounds of splashing. All but one, and she, poor thing, was darting back and forth looking for something. Well, you know how it is. When you see someone looking for something, you start to look too. The man did this. He started looking all around him, and then he saw it. Her sealskin. Now the legend goes that whoever owns the sealskin owns the woman, and the man knew that. Funny thing, he wasn't really a bad man. He was just very lonely. and he saw that she was very beautiful. And so he did what some would consider a selfish thing. He picked up the sealskin and he hid it. Now she was standing with her feet in the froth, her arms were outstretched, and she was calling out, "Come back, come back." But the truth was that the other Selkies, they had swum so far, so quickly, that they hadn't even noticed that she wasn't with them. She was now crying so piteously that the man could stand it no longer. He went down to the water's edge, and he said right behind her, "What is it you've lost, woman of the sea?" She turned, and with a frightened cry, she looked at him, for she had never seen a man before, and she stepped back. And then she stepped in, and she looked right at him, and she said, "It is my sealskin. If you have it, or you know where it is, give it back to me, for I wish to go back to my home in the sea." "Well, if I give it to you, what will you give to me?" said the man. "Oh, I will give you all the treasures of the sea. There are more jewels and gold than you could ever imagine down there. You would be a rich man." And as she spoke, her voice sounded like waves crashing inside of a shell. And she was so very beautiful. The man stood there looking at her, and after a while he said, "No. No. It is my wife that you shall be. And after a while, you will forget about swimming around in the cold, green sea." And the woman tried to explain to him that she could not live on the land, that she was a creature of the water, and that the sea was never cold. It was always like a river is in the summer. But he would hear none of that. Instead, he found some clothes for her. He then took her to the priests, and they were married. He brought her home to his thatched roof hut and sat her in front of the peat moss fire. When she first saw it, she gave a little cry because she had never seen a fire before, and she thought it was some kind of strange crimson jewel. He sat down next to her and said, "Have you ever seen anything as beautiful as that underneath the sea?" And for the first time since he had taken her, she stopped crying, and she said in a voice so soft you could barely hear her, "No. I know not what there is underneath the sea, but I know that you are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life." And then he began to stroke her hair and to kiss her neck. She never forgot the wonder of the fire. It was the first thing she brought her children to see after they were born. She bore the man 3 children in the 7 years she lived with him, and she was a good wife. She always kept a clean and happy home. She baked bread. She made sweaters from the wool of his sheep. They never spoke of the sealskin, not he to her, nor she to him. But one day, when he was out plowing the northern field, the one that overlooks the bay, he saw her standing on a large white rock. Her long hair was flowing in the wind, her arms were outstretched, and she was singing a mournful, plaintive song. "I am a woman upon the land. I am a Selkie on the sea. And when I'm far frae strand, my dwelling is in Skolskeri." He looked out into the water, and he saw there hundreds of seals bobbing up and down in the waves. "Well," he thought, It would be strange if she weren't lonesome for her own people. But as for that sealskin, I've hidden it well. One night, right at twilight, she was in the kitchen. She had just baked a fresh batch of bread, and the air was filled with that fantastic aroma. Her children were outside playing, and their voices sounded like little birds chirping in the wind. The swallows were settling into the thatch for the night. She was watching the sky change from blue to red to pink and purple. And then she heard a sound. "Mommy! Mommy, quick, come out! Come out!" She ran outside because she thought one of her children had been hurt. She found them inside of the barn. They were standing around this big brown thing. They were poking at it with their sticks. They said, "Look, Mommy, it looks like a great big cat." And there she was, standing, looking down upon her sealskin that had been hidden under last year's hay. It was lovingly oiled. Well, after a bit of poking, the children tired of that game, and then they ran outside to find another one. She stood staring at it. And then the wind picked up. And the wind carried with it the sound of her children's voices and the smell of the bread. And she looked out, and she saw the sky turning those beautiful colors. And she thought to herself how much she's come to love this life. She was just about to cover up the sealskin and hide it once again under the hay when the wind shifted again. And this time the wind brought with it a sound she hadn't heard in 7 years. It was the sound of the sea. She could hear the waves crashing against the rocks. She could smell the salt in the air. And she was flooded with the memory of who she really was. She reached down. She picked up her sealskin and she began to run as fast as she could down to the water's edge with it. She went past her children. They looked up at her and said, "Mommy, where are you going?" She said, "I'm going home." And then suddenly everything got a little blurred because the father was there, and he asked the children where their mother was, and they told him, and his face went white. He said, "Which road did she take?" "The low road." So he took the high road. He went as fast as he could, and he was a tall man. He could run very fast, but she had intention on her side. He got there just as she went into the water and emerged as a seal. She cried out to him, "Fare ye well. You are a good husband to me, and I loved you. Tell the children I'll miss them, but it's time for their mother to go home." And with that, the woman of the sea dove down under the waves and was never seen again. That night, the husband put the children to bed by himself. It was the first night of many nights he was to do so. After they were asleep, he would come and sit in front of the peat moss fire, and he would sing a mournful song. When first I saw you, I saw beauty, but I blinded my eyes for fear that I should first I heard you, I heard sweetness, but I turned away for fear of my I blinded my eyes, my face I turned away, I hardened my heart for fear of my
Music by Hank Roberts. Storytelling by Regi Carpenter. A traditional story entitled Woman of the Sea. And I'm pleased to have Regi Carpenter as a guest on the show today. Thanks for being here, Regi.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, it's nice to be here with you.
And thanks so much for this beautiful story you told. I'm curious, how did you first run across this story?
I met this story a very long time ago when I was a relatively new teller. Of course, it's one of the classics and is considered, one of the great feminist stories, to me anyway. And I just was really drawn to it at a time when I had had my first child, and I was thinking a lot about this story about, how could she leave her child? How could she do that? And I understood that sometimes a woman just has to be a woman. She can't always be a mother. She can't always be a wife. And that's how I understood the story is that she's taking back her identity. And so I just love this story.
Was there an image in the story which grabbed you at first, which made you say, that's, I got to tell that, a moment in the story, maybe?
The moment that I've always found the most poignant is when the children find the sealskin. And then in my version, I have she's willing to cover it back up. And then something overtakes her. So that's the moment when I really, that I love that story. And it never fails to hit me around, do I want to cover it up? Mm-hmm. But then her instinct takes over, her true nature takes over, her true identity comes to the forefront, and she can do nothing but pick it up,
Yeah. And you see this story in general as being more about human relationship, perhaps? Or for you, is it also relationship with some sort of other world?
That's a really great question. I see it as both. The main sad character to me is the husband. Mm-hmm. And in my version, I leave him alone and lonely at the end because he can't give, nor can he allow her to make her own decision. Mm-hmm. So he takes her rather than asking her. Mm-hmm. And he forces her. Mm-hmm. to stay. And like any relationship, sometimes you just get used to that and you find the good, you find things to make it work, even though it doesn't really work because it's not of equals. But the relationship that she has to her true nature, which is a being under the sea and its own life, and how we come to look at it, he says to her, it's so cold and dark. And she's trying to explain to him, no, it's never cold and it's never dark. That it's full of riches that you might want, but that we, the richness is just the water. And to me, that's her nature. That's her, her element. So, yeah, the relationship she has with the water is her soul place.
I love this story. It's so beautiful. But I wonder too, it seems as if it's almost like the story is saying our true nature as humans is to be individual, perhaps, and less so in community. Because perhaps those are two truths. We're only ourselves when we're with others, would be one truth. The other would be we're only ourselves when we're completely alone. Do you have any thoughts about this? I mean, is it saying human connection is impossible over the long term?
Well, that's a lot to put on one story. Yeah, I like your quote. I remember reading that we're in relationship to learn how to be alone, and we're alone to learn how to be in relationship. I don't think the story really addresses that because there is an inequality, right? There's not a true relationship because she's been coerced. So she hasn't come to it freely. So I don't think that saying she's learned to be in relationship, I mean, it's not so much learning to be in relationship, it's learning to survive within a relationship. And that's what she does. And that's why he's so, the ending is so tragic because he realizes that at the end and it's too late.
Thank you. Thank you. And I don't want to get too historical, but this story comes from Scotland and Ireland areas, correct?
This version, but there's many versions that come from the Netherlands, the countries up along. There's many versions of this story, and you can compare. I did a lot of comparison of the stories, in order to come up with my own. I think one of the most famous versions is Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She includes that in her book, Running with the Wolves. So most people know it as that. But I just really felt like the husband, my heart went out to the husband because she has so much strength. She really is such a strong person, but he isn't, and at the end, he's just lonely and afraid and broken.
You inhabit these characters so well in your telling of the story. Is that something which you've had to work at, or is that something which has come fairly naturally to you as a storyteller?
It's something that I've gotten better at, but I've always had a good, all tellers understand that stories are pictures and that language is the can opener to the psyche, and vocal tone is the can opener in, it pries open the mind and the imagination. So I've always had a really strong visual sense, and I've worked quite hard at developing what I call image-driven language. I've also I love to listen to stories and study stories. When I was a new storyteller, I would just listen gleefully to my favorite tellers, and I would analyze what they were doing. I got that book by Ruth Sawyer, and the art of, I think it's called The Art of the Storyteller, or the art, is that what it is? Yeah, The Art of the Storyteller. And she just really talks about how to do it. And I would sit and listen, I would pause, and I would analyze, okay, why am I loving this story so much? And that, and then I would begin to tell. And like most new tellers, I thought the story was about words. And I failed, miserably in the beginning, because I really thought stories were about words. And after I failed enough, I went, okay, I'm missing something. What is it I'm missing? And what I was missing was the silence and the pause and the calm. And I just didn't get it. And I hope I do now. I really hope I do now. But yeah, falling into the story. I teach storytelling at college, and one of the things I always tell the kids is, what would happen if this were true? What would happen if it were true? And all sorts of crazy things happen in stories. I mean, a woman with sealskin, that's pretty crazy. But what if it were true? What would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it smell like? What would the wind on this thing called skin feel like? The sensuality of this story is just overwhelming.
Do you find your words change much from different tellings of the same story?
I improvise a lot in the creation process. And then once I settle into the language doesn't really change, but the feeling, the tempo, the place that I can inhabit changes is influenced by where I am that day. Once I have the story, I've worked quite hard to get it where I want it. And I stay there usually until I no longer have that same interpretation. But I find that when a story is, when the story has outgrown me, I just say, thanks a lot.
When it's outgrown you, you mean when it's sort of reached a place where you can tell it and you don't have to attend to it so much, perhaps?
No, outgrown it, I mean that, the stories have such inherent wisdom, and they outgrow me because I'm either not ready for them, or I've gone in a different direction.
The storyteller Ben Haggerty told me once that honestly we're kind of putting people into mild hypnotic states, which feels very true. And the way you tell this story is very much, it's like a beautiful dream that we're all having.
Yeah. When you're telling the story well, there's an entrancement that happens. That when things aren't being rushed, that and this happens in the healing arts. It happens when you're in a community, when you're singing, you're all breathing together, you're blinking together, your respiration and heart rates sync up. That happens when you're with a good massage therapist, and it happens in storytelling. There's an entrancement state, and that's something that has to be carefully created by the teller. There's an image that I love. I perform sometimes at these really, really large festivals. There might be 2,000 to 5,000 people in a tent. And there you are, you're just this little matchstick up on a stage. And in my mind, you have to turn up the volume of your energy, which isn't to say it's got to be frenetic, but it has to be big. And in my mind, every time I'm walking up the steps to the microphone, I'm throwing this big fishing net over the whole place. That's how I'm thinking of it. I'm going to push my net all the way to those back people. and I'm telling to the back people, because the front people are going to have no trouble with it, but it's the back that I'm pulling in.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That's beautiful. So you've consciously worked on things like tone of voice over the years for yourself.
Oh, yeah. Phrasing. Yeah, think of phrasing. Stories are music, you know, they're all music. They have form, timbre, tempo, volume, shifts, the voices, different instruments at different time.
Mm-hmm.
Stories are music.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of musical background? You sing so beautifully in this story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I started playing piano when I was a little kid, and I went to Ithaca College Music School for voice, but I stopped singing after I got out. It was such a traumatic experience. I had to unlearn everything, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I guess yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in a lot of your work, not just this story, but other stories I've heard you tell, there seems to be a really deep connection to water. Is that true to say, or is that something that in your childhood you had a connection to?
Oh yeah, I grew up on the St. Lawrence River,
Yeah.
just 2 blocks from the river. So yeah, for me, the water, the river is so magnificent. And yeah, the river is my home, definitely.
Were there stories you heard as a child which nourished you and that you wanted to live inside?
That's a great question, but you know, my dad was a big fan of dirty jokes, and my mother was always listening. I mean, it was always working. So I I was kind of a late bloomer with reading, and we had the Children's Childcraft series because my father sold the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so we had these stories, and I just loved to read. There were all the classic folk and fairy tales, you know, all Cinderella and Rapunzel, Gingerbread Man, all of those. And I love to make up songs, and I love to make up stories. Um, those of you on the radio, you can't see me, but I have really curly hair, and so I would put a black long stocking on my head and pretend that I had long straight hair, and and you know, I would pretend I was, you know, Sleeping Beauty, and I never ever got tired of that. I always, you know, I love the classics. I love the classics. They're fabulous. And in fact, you can't really be a storyteller without knowing them, I think, because they inform every piece of literature. Um, they understand, they, you know, they're the underpinnings of of knowing how to tell a personal story well. And in America, there's a hunger for personal stories. If you go outside of America, there's, you know, there are more monocultures, and so they're impressing upon you the traditional literature. But in America, you know, the land of the individual, the and it's hard to tell a personal story well, because the personal story, in order to really work, has to be a universal story. You know, so instead of me telling you a story about my dog Annie, I'm going to tell you a story about my spirit companion Annie. You know, and everybody can relate to that.
Your personal stories are filled, at least to me, they seem filled with just the riotous things of daily life in a beautiful way. You know, there's waffle irons and there's things, and then we've just heard this beautiful story, which is more magical, perhaps we could say. In your life and career as a storyteller, what made you decide to tell personal stories, or when do you choose to tell one or the other, I guess?
Well, that's a good question. I think I went to, there used to be a wonderful festival in Pennsylvania, not too far from here, and I can't remember the name of it. But it was a great festival, and I heard somebody telling a true story, and I went home and I thought, gosh, I wonder if I have any stories. And I didn't think I had any. And then what was the very first personal story I ever told was a story called Diving and Emerging. And it was based on a dream. I had a dream, right? It was right around the same time that I was learning The Woman of the Sea. And I had a dream, I had a memory of a dream. And I thought, I wonder if that could be a story. And I just kind of gave it a whack. It wasn't ever any master plan.
Yeah.
You know, it was really where I just fell in love with stories. I fell in love with listening to stories. And I would set myself little challenges based on the people that I admired. You know, Bill Harley and Donald Davis and Diane Fairlott and Judith Black and so many other tellers that I would just listen and I would think, I wonder if I could do that, because I wanted to be good. And you know, I really wanted to learn the craft, and it's a craft. And I'm still learning how to do it. I'm more familiar with the tools, but every story requires something different, you know, something new. Yeah.
So you found your way to live tellers of stories. I mean, for me as a child, and I think for many Americans, the television is the storyteller, and the films, you know. But somewhere in your life, you found your way to actual. So you sought them out, I suppose. Huh?
Yeah, you know, of course, you know, Beauty and the Beast, Martha Hamilton and Mitch. We all started around the same time. They started, and I was just so impressed with them. And this was back in the 90s when storytelling just popped. It was the first renaissance. And it was everywhere. And yeah, you could go. I remember the very first time. Of course, I went to the National Storytelling Festival down in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And that was Mecca, right? And I went down there and I was sitting in the audience listening to Michael Parent tell a story about playing hockey. You know, he loves hockey. And I remember when I was sitting there and listening to him, and I was just enraptured, I heard this little voice in my mind say, the next time you come here, you're going to be up there. And I did, you know, I was. And it was like, it was amazing. That was really nice. That was in 2009. So that was about, you know, 10 years after I started. And I knew too that I had to start, you know, Ithaca's a bit of a wasteland for storytellers. And so I knew I had to reach out to other communities. And that's when I got involved with the New England storytellers. And I just started sending stories out. I just thought, well, I'm just going to try it. If I don't try it, nothing will happen.
What do you mean by sending out exactly?
Well, at the conferences and the festivals, you know, they have these open mics, and back then you would send in a CD and tell them which story to listen to, and then out of all the applicants, they would choose, I don't know, 5 or 6, and you could do something called an olio, which is a night of storytelling. And you'd go there live, and I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, nobody paid you. You had to pay to go, for God's sakes. But I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to do it. And so I started just meeting other tellers. And then, you know, storytelling is a business of relationship. Everything is a relationship. And so you make friends and they invite you to their thing. And yeah, so that's how I got going with the community. Storytellers are really pretty amazing people.
Do you see storytelling as sort of radical or conservative, like socially? Or are those silly terms to throw at storytelling?
Yes, all of the above. There are different venues for different types of tales. Something that's happened And what I see is that when a teller is making a living, he or she has to cater somewhat to the tastes of the listener. And the tastes of the listener depend upon where you are in the country. And so there are some stories you wouldn't tell in one part of the country. Like I wouldn't tell some stories down south that I would tell in California. You know? So there's a natural kind of market restriction that's put sometimes on you, and that's only being thoughtful. You know, you don't want to rub people's noses in it when they come. But the trouble with that is that one can self-censor, and so Bill Harley told me once in the very beginning. He's told me to stay hungry, stay hungry, and one of the things that it's so weird to be talking about myself so much. It's kind of uncomfortable. But I remember the first time I went to the festival, the National Festival in Jonesboro, I have a different style than most tellers. And I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't tell some of these stories. And then I thought, this is a weekend. And you're going to have to go home with you, and you're going to have to put your head down on the pillow by yourself on Monday. So if it doesn't work, we can't abandon who we are, which I guess the theme of The Woman of the Sea, essentially. And so I just told my stories, and I really, one has to be willing to risk it all, I think, artistically, with sensitivity, of course, but yeah, this is not the time to be afraid. It's the time to be bold. So.
Thank you for that. That's a beautiful answer. I think as a child, some sorts of storytelling I saw in the world seemed very safe, and certainly some forms still do, because they're meant for children, But what draws me to storytelling is frequently its risky and bolder side, and so it's wonderful to hear you describe that and the courage it takes to tell a story, like that. It's beautiful. Okay, what's the next question, Jay? I think we're almost done.
Okay.
Can you, Regi, thank you so much for talking with me today. Can you tell me, tell our listeners what you've been up to lately?
Oh, well, I'm really excited. There's two things in this during the pandemic. This relates to the question you asked me before about risky and safe stories. As a woman teller, I've always felt like we haven't been able to tell, or I've felt constricted. Like I can't tell the sexy stories. I can't tell the body stories. I mean, I can, but I can't tell them on stages a lot. And I just got mad. I got sick of it. And so I started this series. I've never produced a thing in my life. And I started this series called Untold Stories, Strong, Sassy, Silent, No More. And I just wrote a letter to all of my female story artists, the ones that have been, touring and stuff that I love, and said, hey, you want to do this thing? I can't promise you any money. You'll get a half hour. You can tell whatever you want. I'm not monitoring you. You have total carte blanche. And I don't know if anybody's going to come. And so every one of them said yes. And so this next Saturday, in the 20th at 7:30 is our next show. It's the 6th one. And I was going to do it with Noah. I don't tell every time, but sometimes if there's not another teller, I've stepped in. And also, I don't want to be one of those producers who forgets she's a teller. But anyway, Noah Baum and I were going to do this February thing that we had been looking forward to for a really long time. But Noah's husband, Stu, is ill. He has multiple sclerosis, very progressive, and he's come down with pneumonia. So she's not able to do that. So I'm going to do my story Snap, which is my true story about having a mental breakdown when I was a teen and being institutionalized in Ogdensburg, New York, for a year when I was a junior in high school. And it's a really hard story to tell. It's a great story. I mean, I love telling it because it really is about, it's about recovery. It's about love and forgiveness, reconciliation. And it just shows that for me, I hear a lot of times people will say, "Oh, you're so brave to tell that story," but I'm not brave. I was just trying to save my life. That's all I was trying to do. So that's one thing that I'm doing. But I'm also teaching this class, which will start in March, called Storytelling as a Spiritual Practice. And I've taught it on my own because I do feel like stories are a way for me to connect with something greater than myself. It's not a religious class. It's not about that. It's really about listening to stories, reflecting, writing, sharing. And I'm teaching it with my friend who lives in Switzerland, Alison Quaid, every Saturday during March on from 11 to 12:30. And it's I've taught it 3 times now, and it's just such a deep, rich class. It's very gentle. It's very open, and it's just about something greater than ourselves. So that's what I'm doing, and those can be found on my website, www.regicarpenter.com.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Regi. Hope
It was
to talk
great,
to
Jay.
you.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing you again.
Thanks.
Take good care of yourself.
Take care. You too. Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye.
I spoke with Regi Carpenter in February of 2021. And unfortunately, the events she refers to in this interview have since already occurred or are in progress. However, they're an example of the fine work she does, and you can find more info about her classes and her events at her website, which is regicarpenter.com. And here are a few poems for you by Emily Dickinson, which seem to fit this oceanic kind of frame of mind we are in. Emily Dickinson can be playful. She can also be merciless, and sometimes both at once. Here are 2 poems which fit those categories more or less. I started early, took my dog, and visited the sea. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at me, and frigates in the upper floor extended hempen hands, presuming me to be a mouse aground upon the sands. But no man moved me till the tide went past my simple shoe, and past my apron and my belt, and past my bodice too, and made as he would eat me up, as wholly as a dew upon a dandelion's sleeve. And then I started too. And he followed close behind. I felt his silver heel upon my ankle then my shoes would overflow with pearl. Until we met the solid town, no one he seemed to know, and bowing with a mighty look at me, the sea withdrew. She mentions the sea at the beginning and at the end, and all between. It's just a wild sort of journey. I love this with the sea following her, and he followed close behind. I felt his silver heel upon my ankle, then my shoes would overflow with pearl. Is that what happens at the seashore? Do our shoes overflow with pearl? Well, perhaps so. And here's another one for you. The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door. To her divine majority, present no more. Unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation, choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone. Do we talk about this poem? Do we put it up on the wall? Do we figure it out? Do we draw a diagram? The soul selects her own society. The soul within us, the inner life within us, chooses something. And that choice can't be taken away. That choice cannot be anything else. Our desires have consequences, to Emily Dickinson here. And what we want, and our soul knows what is right. The inner life within us knows what is correct and knows what is false. And will choose the true thing. And then close the valves of her attention like stone. Poems go by pretty fast sometimes, especially when they're a couple hundred years old, as this one is. Well, let's see, 1862 is when she wrote it about. So let's do it again, huh? Why not? Sure. The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door. To her divine majority, present no more. Unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation, choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone. Thank you for joining me as we explore the depths of these poems and these stories, the depths of our lives, the depths of the world, the sea and relationship, and land and water. You can hear more stories at my website, which is jayleeming.com, JayLeeming.com. Many thanks to the Patreon supporters out there who've helped to make this possible. If you're able to join them, please do so. That helps to get these stories out into the world, these stories which belong to all of us and are around us like a great ocean of myths and legends that it is. May we all know the land beneath our feet and know the call of the water as well. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and take care.